This exchange of ideas, with researchers reinterpreting findings, identifying alternative interpretations, and conducting new experiments in their attempts to demonstrate or refute the existence of altruistic motivation, has continued over the past 25 years. The debate is not whether empathy can motivate helping. That has been clearly demonstrated for a range of interpersonal behaviors, and even for behaviors directed toward other beneficiaries, such as the environment. The issue is whether this motivation is fundamentally altruistic. Recently, for example, Maynard et al. 2002 found that people experiencing high empathy develop a self-other merged identity with a victim. The researchers' key argument was that because of this merged identity, their participants' own emotional state became coordinated and overlapped with the other person's negative feelings. As a consequence, the participants were basically motivated to relieve what has become a shared personal negative state. We summarize the different challenges to Batson's empathy-altruism hypothesis and the evidence for and against the position in Table 4.3. Figure 4.3. Key elements in Batson's 3 motivational paths to helping. So it's a flowchart. It starts with the perception of the other's need, which leads to one of 3 paths. Path 1, reward-seeking, egoistic motivation. The internal response is the perception of the situation as an opportunity to gain reward or avoid punishment, which leads to the motivational state of egoistic motivation to gain rewards or avoid punishment, which leads to the behavioral response of help, not necessarily effectively. Path 2 is the arousal-reducing egoistic motivation. The internal response is vicarious emotional response of distress, which leads to the motivational state of egoistic motivation to have arousal reduced, which leads to the behavioral response of a response that most efficiently reduces arousal. Path 3, empathetically evoked altruistic motivation. The internal response is vicarious emotional response of empathic concern, which leads to the motivational state of altruistic motivation to have others' need reduced, which leads to the behavioral response of helping effectively or have another person help effectively. So path 1 corresponds to the negative state relief model, reward-seeking egoistic motivation, and path 2 corresponds to the arousal cost-reward model, arousal-reducing egoistic motivation. Over time, however, an impressive body of evidence has been accumulated not only by Batson and his colleagues, but also by independent researchers who make a very strong case for the existence of altruistic motivation and its implications. For example, one implication is although egoistically motivated people would not be motivated to help another person if their mood could not be improved, i.e., because it was frozen by a drug, as we described earlier with the Manusia et al. 1984 study. This mood-freezing manipulation would not deter altruistically motivated people from helping because they are concerned primarily with improving the other person's welfare, not their own. This is what a study by Schroeder et al. 1988 found, but also see Cialdini, study 2 for a different result. Contrary to the negative state relief interpretation, and consistent with the view that empathic people are motivated by the other person's welfare, Schroeder et al. Found that people experiencing high levels of empathic concern demonstrated high levels of helpfulness even when they believed their own moods were unalterable. Other findings also converge to support the basic proposition of the empathy-altruism hypothesis, which is that people experiencing relatively high levels of empathic concern are altruistically motivated and primarily concerned about improving the welfare of another person in need, whereas those low in empathic concern are egoistically motivated. For instance, if people are concerned mainly about making another person feel better, they would be expected to be less motivated to help when their actions cannot relieve the other person's distress compared to when it will, or when helping someone will be harmful to him or her in the long run, e.g., buying a person a package of cigarettes. In contrast, if people are egoistically motivated, They would be likely to help regardless of the effect on other people because they can feel better and improve their own mood just by trying to help. The research evidence indicates that when people are experiencing empathic concern, they attend primarily to the effects of their actions on the other person. For example, they are less likely to help when this action would not improve the other person's mood, even though it might improve the helper's own mood, or when the immediate act of helping would be actually harmful to the other person in the longer term, e.g., because giving too much help would undermine the other person learning to solve the problem on his or her own. In addition, empathic concern produces a very specific type of motivation, one aimed specifically at ameliorating the other person's condition that had aroused the emotion in the first place. Recall from earlier in this chapter that guilt increases helping directed not only toward rectifying the harm, e.g., helping the person on the experiment that was ruined, but also in unrelated areas, e.g., helping someone pick up groceries. Do the prosocial effects of empathic concern also generalize to other situations? The answer is no. In particular, DeVideo et al. 1990 demonstrated that empathically aroused participants helped a person in need more when helping relieve the person's main problem than when it solved an unrelated problem. This finding was inconsistent with predictions of the egoistic negative state relief model, which suggests that people will engage in any kind of helping that will improve their mood. But the findings did support the empathy-altruism hypothesis. That is, DeVideo et al. Found that when people experienced empathic concern, they did not engage in just any type of helping available to them. Rather, people only engaged in helping that would alleviate the problem that produced their empathic concern. This is because they were motivated by a desire to solve the other person's main problem, not to eliminate another problem or find another way to feel better. Table 4.3 challenges to and support for the empathy-altruism hypothesis. Okay, so there are a bunch of alternatives to altruism that are then rebutted by other researchers. So the first alternative to altruism, empathy-specific punishment. People will think particularly badly of an empathically aroused person if he or she leaves the scene without helping. The rebuttal is that empathically concerned people help even if others are not in a position to evaluate them. An alternative to altruism is empathically concerned people will think particularly badly of themselves if they do not help. A rebuttal is empathically concerned people help even when they learn that most other people do not help in this situation, providing a good excuse not to help. An alternative to altruism is empathy-specific reward. Helping is especially rewarding for empathically concerned people. A rebuttal is empathically concerned people help even when they will not learn of the benefits of their aid, and that empathically concerned people feel just as good when they learn that others have helped as when they help. Alternatives to altruism, relieving sadness. Empathically concerned people help because they also feel greater sadness, and sadness is a negative state that motivates egoistic helping. The rebuttal is empathically concerned people help even when they believe their moods cannot improve. As well, empathically concerned people help even when they believe that their mood will be improved in another way. And also, empathically concerned people help in a way that is directed at relieving the other person's specific problem, not at helping others generally. Alternatives to altruism, self-other merging. The conditions that lead to empathic concern create a sense of self-other merging, which then produces an egoistic motivation to help. The rebuttal is, empathic concern, at least in some cases, motivates helping under conditions that inhibited self-other merging and predicted helping over and above merged identity. Psychology is dominated by principles of egoism and hedonism, however, and a persuasive demonstration of truly altruistic motivation must withstand the challenge of all alternative interpretations based on egoistic motivation. As long as other researchers can identify other plausible suspects, the case for the existence of altruistic helping is not totally closed. Nevertheless, the empathy-altruism hypothesis has successfully withstood a range of different challenges over the past 25 years. and has produced a strong case for the existence of altruistic motivation, at least in a circumscribed set of situations. Demonstrations that purely altruistic helping can take place, even those that occur in the somewhat sterile environment of a laboratory, have significant implications both within psychology and beyond. Within psychology, the existence of altruism challenges the assumption that people are inherently motivated only by self-interest. This hedonistic view of human nature has been a fundamental principle underlying approaches as disparate as Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theory, e.g., the pleasure principle, and B.F. Skinner's behavioral perspective, e.g., the application of the law of effect. These approaches all propose that people's actions are determined by the actual or anticipated consequences that they will personally receive. The demonstration of altruistic motivation reveals that the perceived consequences for others can also be fundamentally important. Although the context may be sterile and the conceptual distinctions may sometimes seem too fine, this laboratory activity is critical. Just as researchers attempt to understand the causes of diseases such as cancer and AIDS with microscopes and test tubes, behavioral researchers are attempting to understand the very essence of why people help others. Although these techniques might seem microscopic, the implications and potential applications are large and broad. If altruistic helping really exists, and if we can understand the causes of other-oriented altruism, then perhaps we can make human behavior more humane. The controversy over the existence of altruistic motivation has also focused researchers on particular forms of helping. Nevertheless, as we discussed in Chapter 2, helping and other forms of prosocial action are integral even to species that are limited in their cognitive capacities and reflection. Thus, in the next section, we consider altruism from other perspectives and identify different types of altruism. Types of altruism. The prosocial actions we have examined in this chapter can be compared to those discussed in Chapter 2. In that chapter, we were almost exclusively concerned with altruism as behavioral geneticists would define it, behavior that increases the chances of another's survival at some cost to the helper. Conscious motivation had nothing to do with this kind of altruism. We can see this when we consider the actions of animals such as ants, bees, and birds. They display behaviors that are hardwired into the organism and performed without any apparent hesitation or thought. The ground squirrel sees a hawk and gives the alarm. The ant smells the intruder and attacks. Sober, 2002, called this evolutionary altruism. However, with higher mammals, and in particular primates, this is not the way things usually work. In this chapter, we saw that among humans there is thought and deliberation before a helpful act occurs, and of course, sometimes it may not occur. Sober, 1992, called this psychological altruism, a conscious action specifically intended to benefit another person at some cost to the actor, taken with an understanding of what is to be gained and lost. Psychological altruism is relatively rare in non-human species, but what about humans? Do they display both kinds of altruism? If so, could there be two different mechanisms affecting humans' altruistic behavior, both with innate components? We have seen in this chapter that it is easy to make the case that some form of psychological altruism occurs among humans. It is based on conscious, rational decision-making and involves intentions to benefit another person. Because intentions are involved, the social psychological distinction between altruism with the goal of improving another person's welfare and helping with the goal of improving one's own welfare is relevant. The capacities for empathy and emotional communication are two mechanisms that can contribute to the processes involved in this type of helping. But do humans also display evidence of evolutionary altruism? This more primitive form might be triggered under very specific conditions and would lead to rapid, perhaps unthinking, altruistic action. Evolutionary altruism would be less subject to environmental variables and higher-order mental processes than would be the more sophisticated psychological altruism. Although humans are more rational and reflective than other animals, we still share a biological heritage with other species. As a consequence, many vestiges of our evolutionary past including evolutionary altruism, may remain. As we have described before, we know that people in some circumstances may engage in very rapid, almost reflexive helping. See also Chapter 3. Pelyavin et al., 1981, reviewed a large number of experiments involving apparently real emergencies and found considerable evidence of impulsive helping. This type of helping resembles evolutionary altruism in other species. It is also rapid and is generally unaffected by the social context, e.g., as the opportunity to diffuse responsibility onto others, and potential costs for intervening, e.g., personal danger. Pelyavin et al., 1981, proposed that clear, realistic situations involving friends or acquaintances produce high levels of arousal and focus attention on the victim's plight. As a consequence, the bystander is most concerned with the costs for the victim receiving no help. Personal costs of helping to the bystander become peripheral and are not attended to. Therefore, the impulsive helping behavior that may appear irrational to an uninvolved observer may be a quite rational response for a bystander attending primarily to the costs for the victim receiving no help. This description comes very close to Sober's definition of evolutionary altruism. The response is rapid, relatively unthinking, and without consideration of concerns for personal safety. Pelyavin et al. Also pointed out, one of the factors that seems to be predictive of impulsive helping is prior acquaintance between the observer and the victim. In the case of a strong friendship or a love relationship, it is even more likely that impulsive helping will occur because of increased arousal as well as greater sensitivity to the other's problem. Thus, both sophisticated reasoning and more primitive, non-cognitive biological mechanisms may permit humans to perform a range of altruistic behaviors well beyond those of other organisms. The answer, summary, and implications. In conclusion, the answer to the question concerning why people help involves both their thoughts and their feelings, i.e., cognitions and emotions. With regard to cognitions, people can learn through their direct experience or from observing others that helping is a positively valued social behavior. The other important cognitions involve social and personal norms. Norms establish standards for when people should help, and they lead people to expect certain social and personal rewards and punishments. Personal norms, for example, motivate helping because people have developed ideals about how they should act in certain situations and also experience feelings of personal responsibility and obligation to help. Turning to feelings, the way people interpret empathic arousal shapes their motivation to help. The nature of the emotion that is experienced determines the nature of the motivation it generates. If the emotion is anger or disgust, people are motivated not to help. If the emotion is personal distress, sadness, or tension, they are egoistically or selfishly motivated to improve their own welfare by helping others. If, however, there is a special bond to the person in need that leads people to interpret their arousal as empathic concern, they may be altruistically motivated to help. That is, their primary goal is to reduce the other person's distress. The use of terms such as egoistic or even selfish to describe why people sometimes help may make us lose sight of a very important point. Even egoistic motivations to help others are essentially prosocial. If I am motivated to help you because I am distressed or saddened by your situation, I am still motivated to help you. In fact, it is quite remarkable how the fates of people who have never met can be so intertwined and complementary. Your benefit is mine, mine is yours.